Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Peter Brownrigg. I'm representing FACT, Friends Acting for Climate Today. And today, FACT, along with Faith Alliance, along with Faith in Science and SOS, the Subcommittee on Sustainability, is bringing you today's speaker, General Galloway. Now, before I introduce him, this month is Earth Month, so I want to mention some of the other events that are going on this month. Today, of course, we have our today's speaker. On Saturday the 19th at 1:30 and 7 o'clock at Go Theater, the movie presented by SOS called Game Changers. Athletes share the benefits of a plant-based diet. April 22nd is Earth Day. Choose a delicious plant-based menu option. April 24th, Thursday from 11 to noon at Go Theater, The Promise of Agrivoltaics in the Commonwealth, a case study with Ashish Kapoor, Senior Policy Analyst, Piedmont Environmental Council. And finally, April 22nd is Earth Day. At 10:30 and at 1 here at the Go Theater, a free drama club performance of The Animals' Lawsuit Against Humanity. And for that one, attendees are invited to donate a stuffed animal 12 inches in size or less, very gently used or with tag intact, a tag attached, and the animals will go to one of 3 children's shelters, for which we will thank you. And so now a brief introduction to our speaker, General Gerald Galloway. He's PE, that's professional engineer, PhD. Following graduation from West Point in 1957, was commissioned into the Army Corps of Engineers. After 22 years of command staff and military and civilian schooling assignments in the US, Germany, Vietnam, he became professor of geography and computer sciences at West Point. Over the next 16 years, he became involved in national water issues and military geography, served a year as Academy Chief of Staff and Deputy Post Commander, and did just a whole bunch of other things. I don't want to take too much of your time. But after retirement, he became Academic Dean of the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, National Defense University, Executive Secretary of the U.S.-Canada Water Commission, Flood Management Guru, and Civil Engineering Professor at the University of Maryland. He continues to work as the Vice Chair of the Center for Naval Analysis Military Advisory Board and on the board of the Center for Climate and Security. He holds degrees from Princeton, Penn State, the Army Command and General Staff College, and the University of North Carolina. So without further ado, here's General Gerald Galloway.
Thank you all very much. I'm happy you're here. Anybody that wants to talk about water challenges and anything to do with the environment, I'm always happy to entertain them. Our department at West Point, when I was there, Geography and Environmental Engineering, became the centerpiece of how we were treating and dealing with the U.S. Army as a whole and DOD in the issue of climate change. But I'm here today to talk about climate challenges. What are they? And I'm interested in telling you what I know about the water challenges. They're growing every day. What do we do about it? What can you do about it? And I'm really interested in what you should be doing, not me. When I teach I taught at Maryland for 17 years. I quit 2 years ago. It's interesting to see whether or not young people are interested. And unfortunately, a whole bunch of them are not. You see them protesting at times, but when they really have to get into it, they're not as enthusiastic as they need to be. And we need to be hard at work in doing that. These headlines tell you a little bit about the challenges that we're facing. They're all over the country. It's interesting to me, you can see federal judge blocks implementation of Waters of the United States rule in 24 states. That's an issue of what is waters that are controlled by the federal government, and what are waters controlled by the state. And the real issue has been in the Supreme Court, it's been in the Congress, it's been back to the Supreme Court. been in the Congress again. It's been debated. The Biden administration had an approach to it. It wasn't 2 weeks into the new administration, then the Trump administration went back to the previous one prior to Biden and prior to Obama. So all these things change, and that's one of the interesting issues we have. How do you run a program? How do you deal with a big issue like water when we're changing all the time? We've got floods. You all know what this is. New Orleans, 2005. We had a whole bunch of people killed. I was sent to Japan by the Army to talk to the Japanese government in several locations about flooding because they're very interested in that. They're very concerned that they don't want to have a big flood event. The Fukushima example was something very terrible when they had the tsunami and the consequences of that. But they said, how can the United States, as culturally advanced as it is, as technologically advanced as it is, have this many people, 1,300 people killed in New Orleans, the city, to have 200 million in damages and growing. We're still recovering from what went on. And that doesn't include the cost of repairing everything. So how do these things happen? How about Sandy in 2012? We knew that sooner or later New York could get hit by a big storm and it could flood a lot of the southern part of Manhattan. You can see that dark blotch on the end is really the area that was out of power for a considerable period of time. And there are still today apartments in Manhattan where there's mold that hasn't been repaired. Something doesn't get changed overnight. It's a very difficult issue. How about this? Many of you have properties or have had properties on the coast. I hope you don't anymore. But when you see something like this, you say, And they had a great number of them on this particular weekend down. This was in the Outer Banks. You see these sorts of things and you say, why do we do this? Why do we let people build there? Or why do you build there? Well, the answer is a lot of people can afford to have that fall down as long as they can rebuild on the same spot, even though there's a cost to society for having that happen. This is the Hurricane Helene. It's very interesting. I have a colleague, and we worked together for a long period of time over the years on flooding. He retired and moved to Tennessee, into the eastern part of Tennessee, up in the mountains. And sure enough, when Helene hit, they had 90 homes in his area that were knocked off their foundations and essentially destroyed. Again, the people had never thought that they would be flooded. And why are these things happening? That's what they ask him. What are we going to do about it? Then, of course, we have the issue of drought. Where are we going to get water? We have dry areas all over the country, and people are still moving into those dry areas. Well, I'll come back and talk about dams, but we're taking out dams. And is it as simple as this looks, just knock the dam down and you've restored the river? Not quite. So there are challenges that we have to face in dealing with even something as simple as removing old dams. We have not enough water in many times to run our inland waterway system, and I'll come back and talk about that for a second. But this is the Mississippi River, and you see it's gotten so narrow that when you put boats along the side, barges along the side, you almost have to stop the traffic on the river, and traffic is valuable for our exports of grain. This happens to be, right now, this year, the Mississippi River at Vicksburg. And you can see that the record low is down there at 7 feet, and the record high is at 43. Almost a 40-foot raise in a river that at that point is almost a half a mile wide. Just imagine how much water you then have to control if you're dealing with something like that. So it's coming back up. It was at flood stage before, or just about at flood stage, and now it's gone down and it's coming back up again. Tremendous rains. If you picked up the Washington Post this morning, you saw an article that said, experts predict that more big floods will occur as a result of the changes in the weather. So we've got not a bright future ahead. What about this? Do you want to have this going into your local river? Do you want it going by the ponds and creeks? Because that's where it starts in many cases, in backwoods neighborhoods, and where you end up with people putting stuff into the river that you really don't want there. And I'd summarize the challenges by, we've talked about the first 3, 4, and then, of course, how do we govern this? Who's in charge? And I'll be very interested in your thoughts on that. What's the world around us? I showed this at Maryland a couple of years ago, and I asked, now how many of you know who Toto is? Huh? What's a Toto? In this audience, I expect you all to know what the Yellow Brick Road was. And that when I say we're not in Kansas anymore, what she was talking about. But in terms of climate, that's really the way we are. We're not where we used to be. It's different today than it was. We've got all of these climate operations going on. The change that's occurring is climate change itself, then population is changing. We certainly are seeing a lot of pressures for development. Just drive around here and you can understand that. And the other things on there are things that you know about, but when you put them all together, it's a tremendous drain on our natural resources, not only water, but all the other parts of the natural environment. And the bottom part is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous national and world situations. Many of you may have heard of the word VUCA. VUCA is that volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, which means who the hell knew it was going to happen? Who could have predicted the fall of the Berlin Wall? Who could have predicted the 2008 crash? There are things that are happening that we don't have control over, and we better understand that. Certainly COVID was one of those. And of course, this lady back here, Mother Nature, is giving us the biggest hard time. Whether you want to agree with it or not, it doesn't really matter. That vehicle she's in is moving. Every day it's moving, and it's causing things that are happening in the world around us. This says a fifth national assessment is under the caption. We do every 5 years a national assessment of climate, and it's supposed to be nonpartisan, and it generally is a nonpartisan report. And again, they're saying, yes, climate change is on the path we said it would be on. There is climate change, and it's continuing. Look at this. The temperatures are going up. We're having annual precipitation going up. Sea level is rising. We're having warmer nights, and we're having something that most of us didn't grow up with, and that's extremely heavy precipitation in a short period of time. You call it, if you're from Texas, a gully washer. You know, everything happens suddenly. They call it cloudburst storms in Denmark, but they're occurring all over the world, and they make it much more difficult to deal with the challenges we're facing. And global warming above pre-industrial levels, and this shows with the temperatures that we might have, how many times, what are we going to have in terms of more heat waves, more tropical cyclones, more wildfires. Climate change is causing, whether we want to agree with it, that it is happening or not, doesn't matter. It is happening, and we've got all sorts of indications that if the temperatures continue to go up, it's going to get worse. And you all, I'm sure, understand all of that. These are the bears. The increased temperature gets us. It gets us as people. You know, we've had 10,000 people killed in Europe in a big heat wave because they're in apartments, they can't get out. We have places in the U.S., in our big cities, where the people don't have air conditioning. And if the power goes out, air conditioning is also out, but the elevators go out, and how do they get up and down? In New York City, especially, when you're on a higher floor, you don't have power, it's getting hotter. What do you do? Sea level rise. You can see all the things that are occurring right now, and the combinations of the above are very, very difficult. We must recognize that they're there. I'm a member of the National Academy of Engineering, and the National Academy was asked to study climate change. I wasn't on the team, but we put 300 of the best scientists we had on it to do 2 studies. And they came back and said, it's for certain happening. It's changing. So I don't argue with anybody anymore. Now, you might have a good argument or discuss, is it occurring because of your car? Is it occurring because of the airplanes you fly on? Yeah, we can argue about how you're going to mitigate that and what the actual causes are, what percentage come from human activity versus natural activity, but it sure is happening. And look at this. These are the $182 billion of weather-related storms and other events last year. It's costing us a lot of money, but it's costing us, the terrible part is the impact on human beings. The people in eastern Tennessee, where my friend lives, they don't have the bounce back that you all have. They didn't have a bank account. They couldn't they're out there getting people from all over the country to come in and help them get back into something they can live in. It's a challenge. And so when you have all of these, any kind of these storms, whether it's a wildfire or not, it doesn't matter. It's a nature-based approach, and it's causing the disaster that is going to hurt a lot of people. Floods and hurricanes. Let me quickly talk through some of those. This is Hurricane Harvey, as you all recall, in 2017, when a massive storm came over Houston and the areas around it. Imagine if you lived in southern Texas and you got 52 inches of rain. 52 inches of rain. Around here, if we get 7 inches of rain, everybody goes, oh, but 52 inches of rain, that's a lot of water in an area, and it doesn't move out of the way. And people say, well, I didn't know there would be things like that. Well, if you went back to the 19th century, you'd see they had massive rainfall events back there too. So this is the street filled with people trying to move. This is the picture of who flooded. 154,000 people had their homes flooded in Houston in Hurricane Harvey. The statistics over on the left, and I'll get closer so I can read them. The 100-year floodplain, everybody talks about, well, I'm not in the 100-year floodplain, that's the danger area. FEMA has called that the special flood hazard area, so anybody lives in that is at risk of a flood, and you have to buy insurance if you have a mortgage, a federally insured mortgage. But only 32% was in the 100-year floodplain. The rest of the flooding that occurred, and you can see there we're talking about 23% and 48% were beyond. They were in areas that people thought the, quote, 500-year or 1,000-year floodplain, where that'll never come to me. My house will never be wet. No, if you looked around, if the land is flat, the 100-year floodplain may go so far, but if it gets a little bit more than that, it can take off across the countryside. And so they ended up with a major problem. One of the reasons they ended up with a major problem was that things have changed. This is a term that is battered about. Some good friends of mine in the USGS wrote a paper in 2008, and it said, we've been using frequency analyses that say, let's figure out what the 100-year flood is by going back and looking at all the floods we've had in the past. And if you were, that's a sophomore in college type hydrology question, you'd figure it out. In 2008, these great hydrologists at USGS said, doesn't work anymore. We've had too many changes in nature, and nature is not behaving in a stationary manner. And you're not behaving in a stationary manner in terms of your development. We're not behaving in a stationary manner in terms of the economy. It's going all over the place. And so what are we going to do? The reliance on this past stationarity, it's dead. In 2015, they said we've spent 6 years looking at how we can solve that problem. Guess what? We can't. And yet, we're still telling people that they ought to avoid a 100-year floodplain when we don't even know what it is. It's an interesting challenge to deal with. This is Houston. Again, this is Houston in 1996. I want you to look at the center of it. The center of there, where it looks like everything is coming together, is the center of town. In 1840, it was under 30 feet of water. So they knew that there was bad water around there, that you could really get in an area that was low. And feeding into that area are all these streams and creeks that provide drainage for the city of Houston. Unfortunately, between 96 and 2011, see that bright green? That's development. They let people develop and take over all the green space, to take over the places where they had drainage, to fill in areas that had grass on them before with concrete. And what does concrete do? It runs it into the stream. So that when Harvey occurred, all the water ran down and flooded all those areas in there. There was no place for the water to go because we'd taken away the natural use of the land. And that's, again, a stationary issue. Why did that happen? It's because they let it happen. It's interesting, the counties far out here, on the far left of this, they included and made on the deed a note that you might be in a flood zone, whereas the people on the inside decided, the county, they didn't want to tell people that because it might make them nervous. Well, that's not a very good way to deal with that. After Harvey, we did a study, a group of us at Maryland and Texas A&M, And it said, where are we going to flood in our cities? Well, let me just show you that. That's Constitution Avenue, if you can see that. It's down on Constitution Avenue, 3 feet of water on Constitution Avenue from a heavy rainstorm on a summer weekend. It put the IRS building out of business for 6 months. It put water in the National Archives' new theater. It didn't get into any of the precious documents, but it's something that goes on. We're still draining downtown Washington as a result of Civil War era storm sewer systems. The Tiber River used to flow on Constitution Avenue. And so we've got places like that we're ignoring. Look at this. The largest flood event in the US in 2014 was not a big river rising up. It was Detroit, Michigan, where it rained, and guess what? They had 10,000 flood drains that hadn't been cleaned in 10 or 15 years, and what were they do? They were filled with junk. And so there was nowhere for the water to go. It couldn't drain out, and what it ended up doing is going on the houses and on the interstates, a tremendous problem. Look at the costs of doing that. 75,000 homes, 1.5 billion in damages, not from a river, but from heavy rainfall and the failure of the city to do anything about it. We have sea level rise for where we live, and Maryland has a law that every 5 years they must repredict what the sea level is going to be, and every time we do it, I was part of the team that did this, and we said again, yes, it is rising, and it's going to rise. It's risen, and it's going to continue to rise on a periodic basis until the end of the century at least. And so what are we going to do about it? My friends at the Naval Academy, you heard I went to West Point, so I'm always happy to point out to them they don't understand the civil engineering. That's the basement of the engineering building full of water. Now they have put a levee around that, so it's now safe. And of course, they're only part of Annapolis itself. Downtown Annapolis is flooding more and more often. And so there's a challenge to be dealt with. So what's the fix on these? Well, one thing we can do for floods is build levees. This is a 40-foot high levee in Louisiana. You can see the safety that the people think they have because there's a school bus. That's the Mississippi River, almost ready to go over the top of the levee, but the people believe in the levee because those are very good levees done by the federal government. There's, unfortunately, in our country, we have 60 to 70,000 miles of levees, most of which are not run by the federal government, most of which started as a farmer taking a dozer out and creating a windrow, and then building it up, and then say, hey, come on, build your houses behind this, you'll be safe. And it turned out not to be the case. But levees can help. We can build dams to control and hold the water, but I'll come back to that. Dams are very useful, but a lot of people, and if I'm an environmentalist, I've been the head of an NGO that has dealt with the environment, and we've always said we really ought not to build dams when we don't have to. But there are times when you need to store water, and so that's one idea. You can raise people up out like this, but what's the problem with this? If you have a big flood and it's on the ground for an extended period of time, as it is now in Kentucky, you'll see the people have been a week or two and they're still expended up in the air. And how about rescue? How about fire? How do you get to places like that when you're surrounded by water? Maybe you can do out-of-box thinking. This doesn't look like the U.S. because it's not. This is Tianjin, China. A few years back, President Xi was looking around. They had a big flood in Beijing. And in the big flood, what they ended up having is that major portions of Beijing were flooded, billions of dollars of damages, people upended, people killed. And he said, knock this off. How can we stop this? And somebody said, hey, sir, what if we make the city like a sponge? We'll capture all the water that falls and we'll either put it in parks like this or we'll have underground storage areas and we'll move out in what's called sponge cities. And he said, great, do that in all our big cities. You've got 10 years to do it and don't worry about what you have to knock down to get it done. And they have been doing that since then. And they've made great progress in reducing the challenges. What that does is open up parks all throughout big industrial cities for the workers to use, taking away the need to have big flood control projects, and they feel that it's giving them water that they can save and use when there's dry periods, as there is in Beijing and the areas in North China. So the idea of this out-of-box sponge cities is very important, that we look to see what we can do. Water supply. What do we need water for? Well, we need water because you want to eat and you want to have something that grows, and it's important that we recognize we are having more droughts, and that means that we need to be able to store water, take care of it. Isn't it interesting? This is Phoenix, Arizona, and I read in the paper yesterday that Phoenix continues to grow at an alarming rate. There are areas on the north side of the city where no water is available. You have to, if you build your house, you have to prepare it with its own water tanks and pay to have somebody bring it into you. Very, very difficult challenges in places in the Southwest. Yet people are flocking to be in warm weather. They have great technology there, great industry, and people want to be there. So how are we going to provide for them? The Colorado River has a problem. We figured out when we were going to allocate the water in the Colorado among all the states of that western part of the United States, we figured out how much water was going to be coming down the river every given year. Guess what? Mistake. We overestimated what was there. And so now, as the annual flow gets less and less, the states have to divide up among themselves who's going to get what. And that's a very difficult problem. Why should California get water out of the Colorado River? They're not next to it. They are. But how do you deal with that? They're far away in terms of the people like those in Nevada and Colorado who have it running through their land. Well, that's being fought over right now. And unfortunately or fortunately, the federal government is in charge. It's not the states can work out what they suggest, but the federal government has to blow the whistle. This is California. You may recall that 2 years ago, we had massive drought in California, and lakes look like this. The statistics down at the bottom are for the United States. We had lots of dry areas in the United States, and California had most of their reservoirs look something like this. Fortunately now, most of them are moving back up, but this could reoccur, and that would be an interesting challenge for them. Now, somebody came up with a great idea. How many of you, this is a real test, know the name Lyndon LaRouche? Anybody? Good. Lyndon LaRouche is a politician. He's run for president. Many years ago, he came up with the idea. He said, the problem is God didn't finish his work. He didn't finish moving water to where it needs to be in the United States. So I want to get the North American Water and Power Alliance, and I'm going to bring water from Canada, from the Rockies. I'm going to bring water from Hudson's Bay and the Great Lakes, and I'm going to take it out of the Mississippi River, and I'll move it to the west. It may take a little bit of energy to pump all that water out west, and it may cause a few environmental problems. Well, he didn't get very far with that, and it went away in the mid-'60s when the environmental movement really came up, except that it's back on the plate. People are thinking, that's what I need to do. I need to take the water from Canada. They've got a lot. But I will tell you, the Canadians, and this is before the tariff, would rather give you their firstborn child than any water. And we're going to go take their water and put it in the trenches in the Rockies and store it there? No. But there are people thinking in these terms. This is dams. You know we have 90,000 dams in this country. There are dams in the state of Maryland, I know, that we don't know who owns them. They're on somebody's property, but they've been there forever, and there's no deed or anything to them. They were built pre-Civil War. And the problem is, if those dams fill up and you get a multiple number of them, and they start falling, you get a cascade and can build up the flow. And as it happened in Georgia many years ago, the cascade ended up wiping out a city. Again, the challenges we have, average age is 57, 56% private. How do we know? Do you want to live below a dam? It's a challenge for you. This is the American Society of Civil Engineers has an annual report, a 5-year report card. And they just put out the new one, and dams are rated D+ with a $65 billion backlog. $65 billion that we need to catch up on. So there are challenges that we have to deal with, even if we want to fix the dams. And a great percentage of the dams are not in good shape. Here's another water issue. Your favorite here, data centers. I had the picture, I took it down, that had Ashby Pond surrounded by the data center war. Again, we're in this country the largest number of data centers. Loudoun County is the largest in the United States. Data center alley, and you can see the challenges, the pluses and the minus. Jobs, money, we need it for IT, we need it for technological advances. What are we going to do about it? What are the impacts? Energy consumption is very large. That's the biggest challenge. As you know, we're arguing over power lines, additional power lines. What's the source of the power? Is it fossil fuel? Is it gas? I showed you on the last one that we're looking for 117 more data centers here in Loudoun County. Where does the power come from? Do the power lines go through your backyard? What do you want to have? What's the noise? What are the other challenges you have? What's that impact on you? Again, we don't have good answers to this, but water is at the heart because the relationship, the nexus between energy and water is very high. You need water, first of all, to cool in the data centers, but you need water in the places that are producing much of the power. So we've got a challenge here, and we don't have an answer to it. We know we want to have more data centers. We want to have a very strong data center, or at least an information storage capability in our country, but who has to pay what price? I'm sorry, you can't see at the top. Another thing you can do is change the rules on who uses water. We're using water laws now that were developed in the 17th century. As you know, in our country, the rule is there's two choices. We have the sort of general use water law, and then we have prior appropriation. And in the West, if you got there first and put your claim in, you have the first rights to that water. So if you're in Colorado and you're on a creek or a river and you've signed up, you can go and you can be number 10th on the list, and there may be enough water for you when there's 10 people there and there's plenty of water. But when it gets to be less than that, the water diminishes. What do? You take number 10 off the list, even if it's Sister Mary and the orphanage. It doesn't matter who you are, it's prior appropriation, first in time, first in right. A law like that is still in effect in most of the Western states. In the East, we do it on a shared responsibility for the water use. So how are we going to deal with that? We've had water commission after water commission come up and say, appointed by the Congress, say, we've got to change that. And they say, yep, but don't do anything. We can have desal, that's under the caption. What you see there is the Poseidon, Carlsbad, California water center, 50 million gallons a day being produced from the Pacific Ocean for San Diego. There are other places where we have it, Tampa Bay, Santa Barbara. There are some 400 different places in the country where we have small or larger desal. Now the challenges with desal is what? Tremendous energy, which means it needs water to do that, to cool. Again, how do you deal with that? California got to do it to start because they had what? Nuclear power plants. Now, do we like nuclear or not? We have to come to description of that. We can sell water rights. You know how Las Vegas survives in an area that's very dry? The water manager for Las Vegas many years ago figured out that if she went out and went to farms and bought their water rights, traded them for money, that she could take care of Las Vegas. And she was fairly successful in doing that, which was very good. She also would come to your yard and say, you've got grass in your front yard. I'll buy that grass and plant cactus there. It'll look beautiful, and I'm going to give you some money back. And a lot of people did that. So there are ways to do it, selling rights or changing your crop. Why do we grow cotton in Arizona when we can grow it with less water, less need in the Midwest of the United States? Good question. We can go to virtual water, if you all know what that is. Virtual water is recognizing that it takes so many gallons, and we've got it here, virtual water, 4 ounces to get a beef serving. It's 463 gallons, and that's a lot of water. But what if I don't ask you to grow the beef, I'll send you the beef. Or what if I don't ask you, Canada sends a lot of produce, lettuce, I'll send you lettuce and vegetables to India. And you don't then have to have the water. You can just buy from us. What's the problem with that? The problem is the people in India say, how do we know the Canadians won't cut us off? And everybody wants food security. What would we do if we said, we're going to import all of our food from somewhere out of this country? No, that's what we're arguing about right now. How are we going to deal with that? So you can see here the number of countries that import Canadian wheat, 70 countries. So they are getting the virtual water that it would have taken to grow that in their own country. It's being provided to them in the form of the wheat itself. So that's an idea, but again, it takes cooperation among countries to see how we're doing with that. Now we have the issue of pollution again. Pollution is a real problem. This is Flint, Michigan. Flint had a problem. Flint said that our water's not very good, it's expensive, so let's get on something that Detroit was using. We'll use their water system. Turned out that when they put that water in their pipes, it corroded and created problems, hurt a lot of people. They ended up going to court, and we ended up with a lot of challenges, you can see. The conclusion, the bottom line there, is an over-focused on cost-cutting arrogance. Who cares about these people? They can figure it out. Disdain, lack of ethics, and moral tone from the top. That's a problem we face when we're dealing with things like this that are slipping through the cracks. So that was a challenge for us. This is the other part of the world. This says in, I can't read what the first line is. 2 million people in the U.S. live without running water, but the more interesting to me is the 50,000 people on the Navajo reservation who don't have good water. How can that be? How can we live? How can you and I sit here in Northern Virginia and build all those wonderful walls for sound and not be able to get enough money to take care of the people on the Navajo reservations or the colonias, which are unincorporated areas where mostly Hispanic live in the area southeast of El Paso? They don't have any water guaranteed. They have to buy it in trucks when they can get it, et cetera, et cetera. The lady on the picture was on Time Magazine this month. Her name is Catherine Flowers. She wrote the book Waste, and she describes in there her county in Alabama where 90% have failing wastewater systems. Why? Because the blacks have to use septic systems, and the whites don't incorporate the blacks into the stormwater system. It's too difficult. They're out in the country. Nobody's looking at that. She became the vice chair of President Biden's Environmental Justice Committee, and they began to make some moves to that. But that occurs all over the country. We're not balancing off who is doing what, and then we've got lead pipes everywhere that need to be replaced. Who's going to pay for that? Looking underneath the house, all the different thingamajigs that can go wrong. All of you like me who moved out of a house and always worried about what was going to go wrong next, the wastewater system is a very big one for us to worry about. Navigation. Why do we care? Well, a barge like that can carry an awful lot of grain. Grain is very important in our exports. And the Mississippi, we've got 25,000 miles in the Mississippi, Missouri, Ohio, the upper Mississippi, and in the Pacific areas of navigable waterways. But they need work. And when we have the weather like this we showed you before, that's the Mississippi at low water. When we had low water in 2011, it was terrible. And ships couldn't go down. So how do we deal with that? You have to spend money. And the grade they're getting right now from ASCE is a C-. Funding. Interesting part is nobody wants to pay for it. I mentioned levees. We've got lots of levees in small towns in the Midwest. They were put up by a levee board, a group of interested citizens, and now they're falling apart. And who's going to pay for them to be done? We're not doing it, and they're collapsing. And you can pick up the newspaper every day, and every one of the floods that we've seen, there have been levees failed because the local people haven't had the funds to deal with them. And it's a challenge. How do we then find innovative resources? We do some of our wastewater by having a loan fund and let cities get it from those loans. But the problem, from the federal government loan, the problem is a lot of these cities don't have any money. And so how are we going to deal with this? And the answer is not putting your head in the sand. We've got to figure it out, and nobody has yet. Who's in charge? Quickly. The 10th As you can see, the 10th Amendment says that what's not delegated to the federal government specifically belongs to the states. And that means that every water law in this country is a state law, not a federal law. We have no federal water laws other than the one I mentioned before, what are the waters of the United States? And it says that the states then, we have the 50 states and the territories, so 55 different sets of water laws that have to be adjudicated. And then in addition, then we threw in Section 8 that the Congress can regulate commerce, so they're going back and forth arguing with the states as to whether or not the states should be involved in dealing with these water issues. And if there's traffic, certainly on the waterways, the big waterways where we have the Corps of Engineers, those big barges, then there is a federal responsibility. But in many cases, there's not. So who's in charge? This is something that a great congressman, he's dead now, Jim Oberstar, came up with. And he said that what we're doing in the Congress is we let everything go to committees. And the committees have their own turf. They want to run their world. And as a result, everything we do in water is done in narrow silos. And those silos keep you from working with each other, working with different parts, having the people that are doing water pollution, not working with the people who are doing navigation or flood control. So we've got to do something. He gave this to his colleagues and they did nothing. In 2007, the American Water Resources Association was asked to get a national policy dialogue. We held 3 of them and sent this letter to the president that it's being neglected and we're dysfunctional. Did that cause a stir? No. It's not. It's below the radar screen, ladies and gentlemen. It's below the radar screen. It shouldn't be, but it is. Until you have something flood or something kill somebody, it's a problem. So unless you consider the jumble of laws, we don't have a policy in the United States for how we're going to use water. And as we go into climate change, you've got to understand that that is a challenge for you to deal with that. No one has anything coming. That's the challenge. I will tell you, this happens to be the European Union. At the time this slide was made and they did this, there were 27 different countries speaking different languages in Europe. Somehow they managed to come up with a water law for Europe. They came up with a flood framework for community action in marine environmental policy, framework for marine environmental policy directive on the assessment of flood risks. They require things to be done. They were able to get 27 countries to work together. And when you go to the Congress and you sit in on a meeting in a committee, there's no intention of anybody having the states work together. They don't want to. I testified before a Senate committee, and the senator from Colorado, I said, and the federal policy, he said, don't ever use that word. We don't want federal policies. We want to do it ourselves. We know what to do. Well, the water that comes out of Colorado goes into Kansas, and the water in Kansas goes into Missouri. And 50% of the sediment that used to flow down the Mississippi River and maintain the delta is trapped behind dams on the upper states' lakes. So how do we deal with that? I don't know the answer. Last thing I'll talk about very quickly is social justice. It's a big problem in water. This happens to be, again, Hurricane Harvey. You can see, unfortunately, not really well, but in the top middle of that, black dots. Those are open ditches for wastewater for rainfall, stormwater in the city. Most of the area in the city in that dark green is minority areas. So throughout the area, people that have more money have good systems. People that don't have money and are the minorities don't get what they need. 50% of the ditches that they use, instead of having storm drains like we have, 50% of those don't work anyway. So it's a challenge. How can you have that? You all have seen the difference between equity and equality. It's equitable, certainly, as you see. Everybody gets benefit from the same supports. They're being treated equally. You're giving everybody a box to stand on. If everybody has to see, then you need to sum up with a different solution, and that's what we're dealing with. We're not people after a big flood. If you've got a $300,000 house, you get a lot more attention than somebody that has a $35,000 house. And we're going to put them back in the $35,000 house, and you know it's not going to work? Not very smart. Next to the last slides are these. This is Washington, D.C. You can barely see D.C., but you can see that there's an area with red. That's lifespan. People who live in Anacostia have a 15-year less lifespan than people who live in Spring Valley in Northwest Washington. Why is that? The environmental conditions under which they live. We could spend hours talking about that. That says underneath there, there's no silver bullets. This is going to take a lot of work on everybody's part to deal with this. The OECD, which deals with developed countries, said, we don't have a water shortage or a water crisis, we have a water management crisis. We're not willing to deal with this. We're not willing to go out and make things happen. So my bottom line is things are going to change. It's going to get worse, climate's going to get tougher, and we're going to have to solve the problems. And that, Dark says, non-stationarity does exist. Extent of risks associated with water are increasing. They're adversely impacting all of us, and we must and can manage them if we get involved. But what do I want you all to do? I want you to press people to tell it like it is. Don't let somebody come in, a politician, and lecture. Don't let your congressman say X or Y. I'm going to work on this and then not do it, and you let him stand by. We've got to become in the process. You've got to get out there and yell. The very fact that you're here is great news. We have to have people that are willing to stand up and stomp their foot. It's great. I gave this talk to a group of people for the Loudoun County Library System in Old Ox Brewery. It's amazing how many people will come when there's pizza and beer at the same place, and they'll come in and listen to this. But they were very much interested in what are we going to do about these sorts of things. As I learned in Ranger School many years ago, don't just stand there, do something. We've got to get moving, and people are going to have to get off the dime. So the last point I want to leave you with is part of my work in national security. Every time we see the same thing happen in a foreign country and water gets to be a problem, we create instability. Instability means riots. Instability means overthrow of regimes, and it means possible commitment of our forces. So this is a problem we need to solve, but we need to help others solve it. So on that note, I'll say, remember, bottom line, nature gets to bat last, and we're standing there watching. So thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer questions. I have the elephant make a noise, but he didn't make a noise this time. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Here's a microphone. Here's a microphone.